Jesus Christ, what a day. I just had one of those long ass days where lots of little things all happening one after another, no breaks. But I'm back. Here I am. So quickly, before we get too crazy, let me just find where we're at with old Sandy Lands. This is us, this is it. Ooh, we have some new orders coming through. So this is by consent, the court orders, okay, by consent. So this is agreed upon by both parties, I'm guessing. Date in order 6th of the orders dated blah blah, which the applicants must file and serve their lay and expert evidence in chief, extended to the 5th of June. Okay. The date in order 7, by which the parties must provide to the court an agreed issues list of proposed orders and submissions for the next case management hearing be extended to the 15th of June. So just extensions, rather. Proceeding being listed for case management. Okay. Okay, the first one is just an extension. I'm guessing this is just an extension for the counterclaim, right? Yeah, so this is the extension of the cross-claim. Yeah, so this was supposed to finish in May, right? Everyone's scrambling for another 2 weeks, essentially. Okay, we continue to wait with bated breath on the ruling of Sandy Lands, the Commonwealth Broadcasting Corporation. Righto. And the Jackie O one, I guess, is sort of a bit more straightforward in terms of what. Yeah, but I'm guessing she's got issues with her contract being cancelled. Okay. Now, the main course for today will be Australian polling companies. There has been a lot of news lately about One Nation polling very highly in terms of first party preferences. And so, I think it came out of conversation. Okay, 5:30. Here we go. Nope. I don't know anything about this newspaper, but fine, let's go. 4 federal polls have been released since Sunday. One Nation has taken the primary lead from Labor in both the Red Bridge and YouGov polls. We'll squirrel that away for later. And is tied with Labor in the Morgan poll. Labor held the primary vote lead in Fox and Hedgehog. If the polls are ranked by the overall vote for One Nation and the coalition, the Fox and Hedgehog poll is Labor's worst, with the right vote at 52%. The right had 51% in Redbridge, 49% in YouGov, and 47% in Morgan. Labor still led One Nation by respondent preferences in all 4 polls, though only by 51-49 in Redbridge. I'm guessing because people that are voting for Liberal are the people that are voting Liberal. There are people voting Liberal that vote One Nation last. So there are instances where two leading vote holders will be Labor and One Nation, and then Labor gets up on second party preference, right? In Fox and Hedgehog, Labor trailed the coalition on respondent preference but led in other polls. Okay. Morgan and YouGov had polls taken immediately after the budget. One Nation has gained in both these polls from their post-budget editions. The next federal election is not due until early 2028. If the changes introduced in the budget pass Parliament, they will mostly be implemented from July 2027. Analyst Peter Brent suggests Labor may regain ground if the sky doesn't fall in after July 2027. Redbridge poll. A national Redbridge and accent research poll for the Financial Review conducted from a sample of 1,000. Okay, I should be able to just go to the source for these ones. But it's all here. Okay, that's not too much to read. So the Redbridge poll was conducted for the Financial Review in May 25 to 28 from a sample of 1,005. Gave One Nation 31% of the primary vote, up 4 since the last Redbridge poll. Labor 28%, the Coalition 20%, and the Greens 12%, and all others 9%. By respondent preferences, Labor led both One Nation and the Coalition by just 51-49. A 4-point gain for One Nation. Okay. By 2025 election preference flows, Labor led the Coalition by 52-48. A 1-point gain for the Coalition. Anthony Albanese's net favourability slumped 10 points to -19. Treasurer Jim Chalmers also crashed 13 points to -18. Greens leader Larissa Waters was down 2 points. Liberal Andrew Hastie down 6 points. Angus Taylor down 2 points. And Nationals leader Matt Canavan down 2 points to -4. And Pauline Hanson up 1 point to 0. In a three-way preferred PM question, Albanese had 31%, Hanson 25%, and Taylor 14%. By 55-23, respondents thought the federal budget would be bad for the nation rather than good. Wow. A whole bunch of wannabe wealthies, aspirational elites. By 48-11, they thought it would be bad for them personally. Wow. Meanwhile, it's affecting primarily the top 10% of Australian earners. On issues, the combined score for the Coalition and One Nation led the combined score for Labor and the Greens. The combined score led the combined score. 39-28 on cost of living, 35-29 on housing, 55-20 on immigration, 42-25 on economic management, 42-23 on crime, and 42-24 on national security. I mean, this is the fallacy of the right-wing strongman, that play that we see all over the world. The left had a 36-32 lead on healthcare and a 40-24 lead on climate change. The right has gained on issues that were assessed in late April. YouGov had a sample of 1,471 people. And is seeing similar numbers. Fox and Hedgehog had 1,700 people. Gave Labor 29% of the primary vote, One Nation 27%, Coalition 25%. but we're seeing similar trends in numbers in terms of approvals, etc., etc. The Morgan poll, Labour and One Nation tied. Ooh, 1,542 sample. Okay, so there must be a science to polling. So I want to know what is good. What does good polling look like? Okay. Gosh, nature. Yes. Like, how is there? How is there? Oh my god! I need to just go down or something. Where do we go? This might be. This might be for another day. Cephology. Okay, wow. We're learning. Wikipedia, do your thing, please. Ah, damn it. Cephology is the study of elections and voting. Cephology attempts to both forecast and explain election results. The term is more common in Britain and in those English-speaking communities that are heavily on British standard language. Cephology uses historical precinct data, public opinion polls, and finance. Okay, so let's continue down a Wikipedia rabbit hole. Okay. Keep in mind, I know nothing about election polling at all. And so to be able to assess what I'm looking at in what polling companies are saying, I need a bedrock, know what is bullshit and what is not. Okay, so this is, keep in mind that I'm coming at politics from the basic of bare minimum understandings, and we're learning along the way together as a team. Alright, so let's be patient and let's go. Oh, bang, no. Wide. Large. Nice. Okay, cool. So polling, often referred to as a survey or a poll, is a human research study, blah blah blah. Opinions usually designed to represent the opinions of the population by conducting some questions and then extrapolating generalities and ratios. We understand this. So there's a bit of a history here. That's fine. I'm not sure I care too much about the history. I want to get into the meats and potatoes. Opinion polls for many years were maintained through telecommunications or in person-to-person contact. Methods and techniques vary, though they are widely accepted in most areas. Over the years, technological innovations have influenced survey methods, such as the availability of electronic clipboards and internet-based polling. Opinion polling developed into popular applications through popular thought. although response rates for some surveys declined. Also, the following has also led to differentiating results. Some polling organisations, such as Angus Reid Public Opinion, YouGov, and Zogby, use internet surveys, where a sample is drawn from a large panel of volunteers, and the results are weighted to reflect the demographics of the population of interest. In contrast, popular web polls draw on whoever wishes to participate. Statistical learning methods have been proposed in order to exploit social media content, such as posts on the microblogging platform Twitter, for modelling and predicting voting intention polls. What a horrible idea. Benchmark poll. A benchmark poll is generally the first poll taken in a campaign. It is often taken before a candidate announces their bid for office, but sometimes it happens immediately following that announcement, after they have had some opportunity to raise funds. This is generally a short and simple survey of likely voters. Benchmark polling often relies on timing, which can be a significant problem if a poll is conducted too early for anyone to know about the potential candidate. The benchmark poll needs to be undertaken when voters are starting to learn more about the possible candidate running for office. The benchmark poll serves a number of purposes for a campaign. First, it gives the candidate a picture of where they stand with the electorate before any campaigning takes place. If the poll is done prior to announcing for office, the candidate may use the poll to decide whether or not they should even run for office. Secondly, it shows them where their weaknesses and strengths are in two main areas. The first is the electorate. A benchmark poll shows them what types of voters they are sure to win, those they are sure to lose, and everyone in between those two extremes. This lets the campaign know which voters are persuadable, so they can spend limited resources in the most effective manner. Second, it can give them an idea of what messages, ideas, or slogans are the strongest with the electorate. Very interesting. Okay. Tracking polls. How many of these polls are there? Okay. Give me a copy. In a tracking poll, responses are obtained in a number of consecutive periods, for instance daily, and then results are calculated using a moving average of the responses that were gathered over a fixed number of the most recent periods. For example, the past 5 days. In this example, the next calculated results will use data for 5 days counting backwards from the next day. Namely the same data as before, but with the data from the next day included. And without the data from the 6th day, yes, okay. So it's like a rolling average, right? However, these polls are sometimes subject to dramatic fluctuations, and so political campaigns and candidates are cautious in analysing their results. An example of a tracking poll that generated controversy over its accuracy is one conducted during the 2000 US presidential election by Gallup. The results for one day showed Democratic candidate Al Gore with an 11-point lead over Republican candidate Bush. Then a subsequent poll conducted just 2 days later showed Bush ahead of Gore by 7 points. It was soon determined that the volatility of the results was at least in part due to an uneven distribution of Democratic and Republican affiliated voters in the sample. So the Gallup organization argued the volatility in the poll was a genuine representation of the electorate. Other polling organizations took steps to reduce such wide variations in their results. One such step included manipulating the proportion of Democrats and Republicans in any given sample, but this method is subject to controversy. Certainly. Deliberative opinion polls. Deliberative opinion polls combine the aspects of a public opinion poll and a focus group. These polls bring a group of voters and provide information about specific issues. So it sounds like, according to this article, that we're sitting more in line with the deliberative opinion polls, because they're not just asking you for which party you would vote for, they're also asking about opinions about the leaders of those parties, as well as various issues that the parties are involved with. These polls bring a group of voters and provide information about specific issues. They are then allowed to discuss those issues with the other voters. Okay, maybe not. No, I think these are independently voted on. Once they know more about the issues, they are polled afterward on their thoughts. Wow. Great way to poison the minds. Many scholars argue that this type of polling is much more effective than traditional public opinion polling. Unlike traditional public polling, deliberative opinion polls measure what the public believes about issues after being offered information and the ability to discuss them with other voters. Since voters generally do not actively research various issues, they often base their opinions on these issues on what the media and candidates say about them. Scholars argue that these polls can truly reflect voters' feelings about an issue once they are given the necessary information to learn more about it. Yeah, but when they vote, the problem is voters aren't going to learn more about it at the time of voting. So this is poisoning the well almost. You're forcing them to learn about the issues and then getting them to vote about it, instead of just getting them to vote based on vibes and feels, which is what currently. Despite this, there are two issues with deliberative opinion polls. First, they are expensive and challenging to perform, since they require a representative sample of voters, and the information given on specific issues must be fair and balanced. Second, the results of the polls generally do not reflect the opinions of most voters, since most voters do not take the time to research issues the way an academic does. Damn, we're academics. We know what the issues are before we even get there. Exit polls. This feels retarded, but I think I know what exit polls are, and I have a feeling that they're pretty fucking retarded. Exit polls interview voters just as they are leaving the polling places. But you're gonna know the result of the election. The actual election. You're going to know the result of the real life actual election that just happened. Why the fuck do you need exit polls? Unlike general public opinion polls, these are polls of people who voted in the election. No fucking shit. Exit polls provide a more accurate picture of which candidates the public prefers. Oh my god. What a waste of time. This is obviously clearly very America-centric, right? This, I guess, is the important part. Exit polls can give journalists and social scientists a greater understanding of why voters voted the way they did and what factors contributed to their vote. See, that's in that case, it's more of a survey than a poll, in my mind. Exit polling has several disadvantages. Yeah, people are not always going to report their stuff correctly. Let's go. Let's read this last paragraph. The exit polling has several disadvantages that cause controversy depending on its use. First, these polls are not always accurate and can sometimes mislead election reporting. For instance, during the 2016 primary, CNN reported that the Democratic primary in New York was too close to call, and they made this judgment based on exit polls. However, the vote count revealed that these exit polls were misleading. Hillary Clinton was far ahead of Bernie Sanders in the popular vote, winning the state by 58%. The over-reliance on exit polling leads to the second point of how it undermines public trust in the media and electoral process. Yes, in the US Congress and the state governments have criticized the use of exit polling because Americans tend to believe more in the accuracy of exit polls. Oh my god. That's so fucking retarded. If an exit poll shows that American voters were leaning toward a particular candidate, most would assume that the candidate would win. However, as mentioned earlier, an exit poll can sometimes be inaccurate and lead to situations where but it did not explain why. It said that it can happen. But it explained what happened, but it didn't explain why it happened. This is, oh my god. What are you doing? Potential for inaccuracy. This is what we want to know. Yikes. Yikes. But this is good. This is what we need to know. And this is where we refine our bullshit meter, right? This is where we're honing Occam's razor and the steel of knowledge. Over time, a number of theories and mechanisms have been offered to explain erroneous polling results. Some of these reflect errors on the part of the pollsters. Many of them are statistical in nature. Some blame respondents for not providing genuine answers to pollsters, a phenomenon known as social desirability bias, also referred to as the Bradley effect or the shy Tory effect. These terms can be quite controversial. Margin of error due to sampling. Polls based on samples of populations are subject to sampling error, which reflects the effects of chance and uncertainty in the sampling process. Sampling polls rely on the law of large numbers to measure the opinions of the whole population based only on a subset. Yes, you're extrapolating, right, from a subset. And for this purpose, the absolute size of the sample is important, but the percentage of the whole population is not important. The absolute size of the sample is important, but the percentage of the whole population is not important, unless it happens to be close to the sample size. The possible difference between the sample and the whole population is often expressed as a margin of error, usually defined as the radius of a 95% confidence interval for a particular statistic. One example is the percent of people who prefer product A versus product B. When a single global margin of error is reported for a survey, it refers to the maximum margin of error for all reported percentages using the full sample of the survey. Okay. You're basically saying when a single global margin of error is reported for a survey, it refers to the maximum margin of error for all reported percentages using the full sample of the survey. So if they say that there's an error margin for this survey, then there's so they've taken the maximum and applied it to all percentages for that survey. Okay. So there's no adjustment for margin of error for varying percentage ranges, which I know can sometimes happen as well, right? If the statistic is a percentage, this maximum margin of error can be calculated as the radius of the confidence interval for a reported percentage of 50%. Okay, here we go. So example, for a poll with a random sample of 1,000 people reporting a portion of around 50% for some question, sampling margin of error is approximately 3% plus or minus for the estimated proportion of the whole population. 3% margin of error means that if the same procedure is used a large number of times, 95% of the time, the true population average will be within the sample estimate plus or minus 3%. Yes. The margin of error can be reduced by using a larger sample. Yes. However, if a pollster wishes to reduce the margin of error to 1%, they would need a sample size for around 10,000 people. In practice, pollsters need to balance the cost of a large sample against the reduction in sampling error, and a sample size of around 500 to 1,000 is a typical compromise for political polls. To get complete responses, it may be necessary to include thousands of additional participators. Another way to reduce margin of error is to rely on poll averages. This makes the assumption that the procedure is similar enough between many different polls and uses the sample size of each poll to create a polling average. So you're doing similar polls, many different polls using the sample size of each poll to create a polling average. Right, so you could take all of these polls, add them together essentially, and get a polling average. And then you've gone from a 1,000 sample set size to potentially a 5,000 sample set size. Convenient. Another source of error stems from faulty demographic models by pollsters who weigh their samples by particular variables such as party identification in an election. For example, if you assume that the breakdown of the US population by party has not changed in the previous election, you may underestimate a victory or defeat. Saw a surge or decline in party registration. Sample techniques are also used and recommended to reduce sample errors and errors of margin. In Chapter 4 of author Herb Asher, he says, it is probability sampling, a statistical theory that enable one to determine sampling error confidence levels and the like, and to generalize from the results of the sample to the broader population from which it is selected. Other factors also come into play in making a survey scientific. One must select a sample of sufficient size. If the sampling error is too large, or the level of confidence too low, it would be difficult to make reasonably precise statements about characteristics of the population of interest to the pollster. Scientific poll not only will have a sufficiently large sample, it will also be sensitive to response rates. Very low response rates will raise questions about how representative and accurate the results are. Interesting. So they're basically saying if you approach 10,000 people, and only 10 people respond, you're getting a very biased sample set. Are there systematic differences between those who participated in the survey and those who, for whatever reason, did not participate? Of course. Hands up if you ever participated in the poll. Why the fuck would I bother? Sampling methods, sample size, and response rates will all be discussed in this chapter. Well, is this really is this really necessary, this sentence? To quote this fucking sentence? What a weird sentence to add to the quote. Okay, cool. The caution is that an estimate of a trend is subject to a larger error than an estimate of a level. Estimate of a trend is subject to a larger error than an estimate of a level. Okay. This is because if one estimates the change, the difference between two numbers, then one has to contend with errors in both x and y. A rough guide is that if the change in measurement falls outside the margin of error, it is worth attention. Non-response bias. Oh, that's hard to talk for this long, all in a row. Some people have been some people have been practicing their whole lives to talk non-stop. I am not one of those people. So, since some people do not answer calls from strangers or refuse to answer the poll samples may not be representative samples from a population due to a non-response bias. Response rates have been declining and are down to about 10% in recent years. Various pollsters have attributed this to an increased skepticism and lack of interest in polling. Because of this selection bias, the characteristics of those who agree to be interviewed may be markedly different from those who decline. Yes, I think this is intuitively, we all understand it. Like it's only the fervent edges of the political spectrum that are probably interested in polling, with the apathetic middle not giving a motherfucker. That is, the actual sample is a biased version of the universe the pollsters want to analyze. In these cases, bias introduces new errors, one way or the other, that are in addition to errors caused by sample size. Error due to bias does not become smaller with larger sample sizes, because taking a larger sample size simply repeats the same mistake on a larger scale. Yes. If the people who refuse to answer or are never reached have the same characteristics as the people who do answer, then the final result should be unbiased. Yeah, of course. Basically saying that if you can manage to meet, if they're basically saying if the people that pick up the phone are the same as the people that don't pick up the phone, clearly there's some kind of mental process in there that is going to impact you, whether you, and that probably has something deep seated in you that determines whether you're more likely to vote for one party or another. So I think it's impossible to escape this personally. If the people who do not answer have different opinions, then there is bias in the results. In terms of election polls, studies suggest that bias effects are small. Ooh, that's lucky. But each polling firm has its own techniques for adjusting the weights to minimize selection bias. Response bias. Survey results may be affected by response bias, where the answers given by respondents do not reflect their true beliefs. Yes, we heard about this, the Bradley effect, or the hidden Tory. This may be deliberately engineered by unscrupulous pollsters in order to generate a certain result or please their clients. But more often it is a result of the detailed wording or ordering of questions. Respondents may deliberately try to manipulate the outcome of a poll by advocating a more extreme position than they actually hold in order to boost their side of the argument, or give rapid and inconsidered answers in order to hasten the end of their question. Respondents may also feel under social pressure not to give an unpopular answer. For example, respondents might be unwilling to admit for unpopular attitudes like racism or sexism, and thus polls might not reflect the true incidence of these attitudes in the population. In American political parlance, this phenomenon is often referred to as the Bradley effect. If the results of surveys are widely publicized, this effect may be magnified, a phenomenon commonly referred to as the spiral of silence. Interesting. So they're basically saying that a biased result can lead to people giving further more biased answers in the future, and it spirals out of control into a one-sided polling. My God, this is not happening. If people are unafraid to claim that they vote for one nation, we have not hit a spiral of silence yet, which is good, but bad. It's good because people feel confident in voicing their opinion. Bad because that opinion is to vote for one nation. Use of the plurality voting system. Select only one candidate. Use of the plurality voting system in a poll puts an unintentional bias into the poll, since people who favour more than one candidate cannot indicate this. The fact that they must choose only one candidate biases the poll, causing it to favour the candidate most different from the others, while it disfavours candidates who are similar to other candidates. Well, I think we saw in some of those other polls they had some ranked preferential stuff. The plurality voting system also biases elections in the same way. Some people responding may not understand the words being used, but may wish to avoid the embarrassment of admitting this, or the poll mechanism may not allow clarification. So they make an arbitrary choice. Some percentage of people also answer whimsically or out of annoyance at being polled. This results in perhaps 4% of Americans reporting they have personally been decapitated. I feel like this would benefit from some numbering in terms of like the ways in which response, like surely we can get some scientific authors in here to make this clearer in terms that these are like 1, 2, 3 wording of questions. Among the factors that impact the results of opinion polls are the wording and order of the questions being posed by the surveyor. I don't think we're going to see any of this, right, when we start reading about the companies themselves, the polling companies themselves. unless we do a poll, we probably aren't going to see any of this. Well, we did a poll at the very start. At the very, very, very start. We did the ABC, what political affiliation are you? Questions that intentionally affect a respondent's answer are referred to as leading questions. Individuals and or groups use these types of questions in surveys to elicit responses favourable to their interests. For instance, the public is more likely to indicate support for a person who is described by the survey as one of the leading candidates. This description is leading, as it indicates a subtle bias for that candidate, since it implies that the others in the race are not serious contenders. Additionally, leading questions often contain or lack certain facts that can sway a respondent's answer. Argumentative questions can also impact the outcome of the survey. These types of questions, depending on their nature, either positive or negative, influence respondents' answers to affect the tone of the questions and generate a certain response or reaction rather than gauge sentiment in an unbiased manner. And I feel like understanding when you're being led on or having someone asking leading questions is probably critical in everyday life. I feel like this happens at every level of persuasion where people are trying to talk to you or manipulate you in some way. And I guarantee it happens all the time. And I'm personally going to be thinking about this. I'm going to try and see if I can spot more of this generally. In opinion polling, there are also loaded questions, otherwise known as trick questions. This type of leading question may concern an uncomfortable or controversial issue, and or automatically assume the subject of the question is related to the respondents or that they are knowledgeable about it. Likewise, the questions are then worded in a way that limits the possible answers, typically to yes or no. So this is where we might say that you would use emotionally loaded language to force someone into selecting what they should view as the socially acceptable answer. There are many good examples of this that I'm not going to right now because I might say something stupid, or at least loaded. Another type of question that can produce inaccurate results are double negative questions. Okay, these are more often the result of human error rather than intentional manipulation. One such example is a survey done in '92 by the Roper organization concerning the Holocaust. The question read, does it seem possible or impossible to you that the Nazi extermination of the Jews never happened? But yeah, that is wild. The confusing wording of this question led to inaccurate results, which indicated that 22% of respondents believed it seemed possible the Holocaust might not have ever happened. When the question was reworded, significantly fewer respondents, only 1%, expressed that same sentiment. I wonder what that currently is today in Australia. We are seeing more reporting on the Nazi movement in Australia. I wonder if it's grown lately or if it's just they've decided to stretch their wings and grow in prominence. Thus, comparisons between polls often boil down to the wording of the question. On some issues, question wording can result in quite pronounced differences between surveys. This can also, however, be a result of legitimately conflicted feelings or evolving attitudes rather than a poorly constructed survey. A common technique to control for this bias is to rotate the order in which questions are asked. Many pollsters also split sample. This involves having two different versions of the question, with each version presented to half the respondents. Yeah, I like this. Surveying is should be boiled down to a science by now. Since psychologists, that's pretty much all psychologists have been doing for the last fucking 80 years. The most effective controls used by attitude researchers are asking enough questions to allow all aspects of an issue to be covered and to control effects due to the form of the question. Adequacy of the number being established quantitatively with psychometric measures such as reliability coefficients. Analyzing the results with psychometric techniques which synthesize the answers into a few reliable scores and detect ineffective questions. These controls are not widely used in the polling industry. Why? The reason for this is not clear. However, it is important that questions to test the product have a high quality. Survey methodologists work on methods to test them. Empirical tests provide insight into the quality of the questionnaire. Some may be more complex than others. For instance, testing a questionnaire can be done by conducting cognitive interviewing, carrying out a small pre-test of the questionnaire, estimating the measurement quality of the questions, predicting the measurement quality of the questions. Well, we have come to the end of my normal broadcasting hour. So with that, we bid you adieu, farewell, do widzenia. We'll see you on Thursday.